fictional art for entertainment.
Usually when we think about, like, the end of society as we know it, there is this collective expectation of a singular cinematic event.
Right, like a massive explosion or something.
Exactly. A sudden, violent disruption.
Yeah.
We look at our media and our cultural anxieties, and we picture, a giant meteor impact.
Yeah.
A rogue artificial intelligence launching a global nuclear strike.
Yeah, or a catastrophic overnight climate collapse that just floods all the continents.
Right. We expect a loud crash. We expect a really definitive dividing line between the world that was and the dystopia that follows. But, well, then you look at certain structural projections, specifically regarding the intersection of rapid technological automation and global municipal governance, and suddenly that dramatic explosion is just completely absent.
He's just not there.
No. We find ourselves looking at a potential dystopia that isn't born from fire, but from, like, bureaucratic paperwork, incremental zoning laws, tax code revisions.
It is the absolute definition of boiling frog scenario. I mean, the premise we are examining today posits that total systemic subjugation doesn't actually require a military coup.
Right.
It can be built entirely through mundane municipal ordinances, the quiet reduction of federal subsidies, and incremental corporate acquisitions of public infrastructure. The real terror lies in the banality of the process.
Absolutely. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we have a mission that is going to take us into some profoundly uncomfortable yet utterly fascinating territory.
We really are.
We're looking at a piece of source material titled 2050 New Age. It's a localized historical narrative, basically a structural thesis set in the year 2050 that chronicles a 30-year shift in global governance.
Starting basically right now.
Exactly. And the core question we are going to explore with you today is this. What happens when the ultimate solutions to climate change and technological automation are actually achieved, but the price for those solutions is the total monopolistic corporatization of human existence?
It is a staggering document, honestly, because it looks at the transition of society not as a failure of our economic systems, but as an absolute chilling optimization of them.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, the crisis isn't that the machine broke down. The crisis is that the machine worked perfectly.
That is such a terrifying way to put it. So here is how we are going to do this. First, we are going to perform a full, uninterrupted reading of the source material to immerse you completely in this world.
Right. We want you to hear the mechanics of this timeline exactly as they are laid out.
Without our commentary breaking the tension, yeah. And then we are going deep. We are going to unpack the underlying economics, the spatial legislation, and the terrifyingly brilliant mechanics of how this future was assembled piece by piece.
The architecture of this timeline is really something you need to experience in its raw form before we begin dissecting the blueprints.
Let's step into the year 2050. The deep dive into 2050 New Age begins now.
2050 New Age. The desk lamp in Paula's cramped Berlin apartment hummed, casting a pale glow over decades of digitized administrative records, corporate ledgers, and institutional archives. It was late autumn in the year 2050. For 3 years, Paula had been documenting a structural thesis regarding global governance.
The systematic conversion of unallocated human populations into managed industrial labor reserves.
She analyzed her primary timeline, tracking a mechanical economic cycle that spanned 30 years. To an untrained observer, the friction of the mid-2020s and 2040s looked like a series of disconnected disruptions. Demographic shifts, rapid automation, and municipal budget collapses. But Paula's documentation proved otherwise.
Phase 1, the structural squeeze, 2024 to 2030.
Paula's digital interface scrolled back to the year 2024. She highlighted an infrastructure precedent from the United States, a high court ruling permitting municipalities to enforce public space zoning ordinances against unhoused individuals. Directly adjacent to it, she linked the 2026 fiscal omnibus package, which had reduced federal baseline resource allocations.
The model began as a localized transfer of fiscal responsibility.
Paula recorded in an analytical voice note for her chapter. Her research demonstrated that by 2030, this two-step mechanism, the contraction of public subsidies followed by strict spatial enforcement, had been adopted internationally. As algorithmic automation steadily compressed middle-income administrative employment, states did not implement universal basic income models. Instead, they reduced fiscal baselines. In the UK, public housing assets were transferred to private equity management. In South America, updated municipal mapping laws designated informal settlements as unauthorized zones. By 2030, a new baseline was firmly in place. Individuals displaced by technological automation who could not secure private housing were legally restricted from occupying unmanaged public space.
Phase 2, Labor Resource Realignment, 2030 to 2040.
Paula shifted the data dashboard to the 2040 markers. This was the decade where the structural loop became fully operationalized.
By 2040, the transition from the management of unallocated populations to the utilization of those populations was institutionalized.
Paula noted. She cross-referenced the operational logistics of major agricultural and supply chain conglomerates. Following rapid workforce contractions due to external border attrition policies in the late 2020s, critical industrial sectors had faced severe labor deficits. The solution, engineered through joint public-private frameworks, was the Correctional Labor Integration System. Paula's monitor displayed schematics of the 2040 Eurozone transition facilities. While public messaging framed them as temporary resource hubs, their legal architecture classified them as contracted institutional facilities. If an individual remained outside the formal employment registry for more than 90 days, automated registry tracking triggered a housing transition notice, routing them to a designated facility. Once processed under existing legal exemptions for penal loop labor, residents were integrated into automated agricultural grids and manufacturing sectors. Compensation was distributed via localized digital vouchers, anchoring the workforce directly to the facility's economic ecosystem.
Phase 3, the Established Equilibrium, 2040 to 2050.
Paula leaned back, reviewing the standardized data for the current year, 2050. The framework was no longer a developing trend. It was the governing economic matrix of the global market. In 2050, the traditional independent labor market for administrative and operational roles had been entirely replaced. Residential access was no longer managed as a standard consumer commodity. It functioned as a regulatory benefit tied directly to algorithmic productivity quotas. She opened the standard international contract template utilized across major global municipalities known as the Civil Stability Accord. Under this system, municipal operations were directed by private logistics and management corporations acting under state charters. If an individual's daily productivity metrics fell below the required threshold, their facility access credentials automatically expired by evening. By the following morning, automated logistics transit routed them to a regional processing sector to fulfill unfilled labor quotas in the physical supply chain. The structural cycle had reached equilibrium. The asymmetric economic distribution her historical sources had predicted decades earlier had solidified. Capital and high-tier technological infrastructure were concentrated entirely within fortified, corporate-governed coastal and northern metropolitan hubs, while interior landmasses operated primarily as captive labor extraction zones. Paula encrypted the final file onto a decentralized network ledger. Outside her window, a fleet of corporate transport units moved down the Berlin transit lanes, transferring the evening labor reserve to the local automated recycling grid. The transition had not occurred through a sudden collapse, but through a precise, incremental optimization of human capital. The decentralized network ledger had barely finished encrypting when Paula's interface chimed, flashing a high-priority encrypted incoming link. The contact ID read simply, Mitchell. She accepted the connection. Instantly, a high-resolution, three-dimensional projection filled the center of her small apartment. Hola, Paula, Mitchell said. His voice was resonant, completely lacking the gravel of advanced age. Paula masked her immediate shock behind a professional nod. According to medical registries, Mitchell was now 130 years old. Yet looking at the projection, his skin was smoother and his posture more upright than the last time she had worked for him 2 decades ago. The radical biogerontological therapies of the late 2030s, once restricted to sovereign leaders, had clearly been optimized by the corporate elite. I need you back on the team. Your structural analysis is wasted on independent archiving. I want you to head a specialized data optimization unit for me. Full housing credits, Tier 1 medical allocation, and unrestricted network clearance. In 2050, turning down an active institutional labor contract was an algorithmic fast track to public space eviction. Beyond the sheer survival necessity, Paula felt a sudden wave of relief.
I accept, Mitchell.
Good. A regional automated transport will arrive at your residential sector at 06.00 tomorrow to transfer you to our primary operations hub in Spain. Your data packet is already routing to your personal terminal. The projection dissolved. By noon the following day, Paula was staring out the panoramic window of a high-speed maglev transit capsule as it tore through the automated agricultural grids of southern France, heading toward the Iberian Peninsula. The capsule was completely sealed, operating on a dedicated corporate right-of-way lane. She opened the data packet Mitchell had transmitted. The document header bore a sleek, minimalist logo, New Start Corporation. Underneath, a small subtitle read, Official Resource Partner of the Global Stability Initiative. As Paula scrolled through the corporate blueprint, the clinical, neutral language of her own research stared back at her, but this time it was formatted as an active corporate business model. New Start was a government-backed entity that held exclusive monopolistic charters over both ends of the economic spectrum. On one side, New Start managed the algorithmic automation centers, the massive server farms and software hubs that had systematically replaced middle-income administrative labor across Europe and North America over the last 20 years. On the other side, the corporation directly controlled the transition and integration facilities, the very institutions that processed and housed the resulting unallocated populations, converting them into manual logistics and agricultural labor reserves. Paula expanded the corporate hierarchy tree, watching the branches multiply across her screen. New Start did not just own factories and server banks. It owned the smart lock infrastructure of the municipal apartments, the localized digital voucher banking networks, the automated transit corridors, and the private security forces enforcing the public space zoning ordinances. She stared at the sheer scale of the network. Every aspect of human life, from the automation that displaced a worker, to the enforcement that removed them from public space, to the facility that housed and fed them in exchange for manual labor, was managed under a single corporate umbrella. A chill settled over Paula as the transit capsule crossed the Spanish border. Looking at the comprehensive data grid, she realized Mitchell wasn't just running a business conglomerate to help governments manage their populations. Through New Start, Mitchell was effectively managing his own sovereign country, operating entirely outside the boundaries of traditional nation-states. The transit capsule glided into the subterranean terminal of the New Start Iberian headquarters. When Paula ascended to the surface complex, she found herself staring at a structural marvel. The building's exterior was covered in a photoreactive skin. The solar harvesting arrays were woven directly into the biomimetic architecture, appearing as natural contours of the building rather than mechanical additions. As she walked through the sprawling perimeter, a profound sense of cognitive dissonance took hold. There were no autonomous drones manicuring the turf. There were no robotic kiosks navigating the concourses. Instead, humans were manually tending to the lawn care, and human hosts were directing foot traffic through the main atrium. In a world where mechanical automation had spent decades replacing human physical effort, the deliberate absence of robotics was striking. A polite young host in a minimalist corporate uniform greeted Paula by name and escorted her into a secure, tiered, briefing amphitheater. Other professionals, data analysts, sociologists, and media architects from various global sectors were filing in, taking seats in the contoured chairs. A beautiful woman walked in, and Paula noticed she was a senior corporate representative as the woman walked to the front. The woman introduced herself as Dawn Summers, director of Spain sector of New Start, welcoming the assembly to Spain.
Each of you has been precisely selected, based on your analytical backgrounds, to construct our new public communication and resource recruitment unit.
Before she could elaborate, the rear door slid open. Mitchell walked into the room with an effortless, youthful stride that defied his 130 years. He appeared to be in his late 30s. He offered a concise greeting to the room and signaled for everyone to take their seats. The ambient lighting dimmed instantly. A massive, high-definition holographic projection filled the center of the amphitheater, illuminating the room with data streams and global maps. We are managing the baseline transition into a new age of human civilization, Mitchell stated, his voice commanding the room. As he spoke, the hologram began cycling through the multi-layered business units of New Start, illustrating the exact operational links connecting them. Mitchell pointed to the global climate data. He traced the progression of the macro-environmental cleanup initiatives that had commenced 25 years earlier, showing the systematic extraction of particulate matter from the atmosphere and the desalination-linked purification of the oceans. The data shifted to partner conglomerates. Mitchell explained how separate, state-chartered entities were executing large-scale land remediation and freshwater restoration. Most notably, the projection mapped the containment and neutralization of legacy radioactive material, the toxic footprint left behind by the uncoordinated boom of nuclear fission plants constructed at the beginning of the AI data center expansion in the 2020s and 2030s. Adjacent data blocks showed the modern, clean energy matrices that now generated the baseload power fueling global industrial needs. Paula sat frozen. She looked around the amphitheater and saw the identical expressions of shock and disbelief mirrored on the faces of the other recruits. The data was irrefutable, yet completely absent from any public record. Mitchell paused, observing the reaction of the room, his eyes scanning the faces of his new communication unit. Many of you are asking yourselves how an ecological and industrial rehabilitation of this scale is mathematically possible without your knowledge. The answer lies in information management. As sovereign governments consolidated administrative control over public domains, media infrastructure, and network distribution nodes over the last 30 years, they strictly regulated the flow of information. He gestured to the glowing holographic globe. The severe crises of recent history, the ones only a fraction of independent archives ever managed to document, were systematically filtered from public networks to prevent widespread social destabilization. And that exact same mechanism of information containment was applied to our technical advancements. Mitchell observed the room, watching the professionals adjust to the magnitude of the data. He stepped forward as the holographic globe dissolved, replaced by a fluid cinematic montage of human history. We are currently navigating an era of systemic rebirth. The past 30 years represented a necessary mechanical transition. We moved away from an exhausted world defined by resource limits and decentralized public ownership. That friction allowed for the consolidation of unprecedented private capital and the optimization of automated algorithmic labor. He gestured to the scrolling historical archives. Today, that phase is complete. Sovereign states and premier business conglomerates operate in absolute partnership to manage the global equilibrium. Under this framework, every individual is guaranteed baseline residential access, clean water, nutrition, and medical optimization conditioned strictly upon adherence to standardized civic rules. Mitchell raised a hand, preempting the analyst's unvoiced technical questions. There is no private accumulation of capital for the general population. The baseline resource allocations, your monthly digital vouchers, expire precisely at the end of each 30-day cycle. They are not designed for wealth building. They are a mechanical reflection of the operational loop between the population and the institutional framework supporting them. He turned toward the large glass windows overlooking the courtyard. As you entered this complex, you noted the absolute absence of autonomous robotics. The individuals performing those manual service and maintenance roles are doing so entirely by choice. They receive the standard expiring baseline allocation, housing, and healthcare. What the institutional system extracts from them is not mere physical labor, but the human connection. That psychological anchor is computationally required for social stability to endure through time. The projection shifted again, bathing the amphitheater in a stark ambient blue light. Our current domestic priority is the complete physical transformation of the terrestrial surface into the optimized ecology you see on these monitors. Reestablishing a diverse matrix of consumer choices for the global population will require significant time. However, individuals possessing advanced technical competencies, those capable of accelerating AI development, structural robotics, and bioengineering, will operate outside the expiring voucher baseline. They retain the regulatory option to accumulate permanent wealth. With a sharp gesture, Mitchell expanded the holographic array, pushing the images upward until the ceiling of the amphitheater seemed to open into deep space. The room gasped. Towering orbital manufacturing platforms materialized, hovering in geosynchronous paths above Earth. Sealed transport logistics units moved back and forth along precise launch corridors. The viewpoint panned to the lunar surface, revealing a sprawling, pressurized colony across the moon. While we execute the systematic remediation of the terrestrial ecosystem, we are concurrently extending our industrial footprint to the lunar surface and the deeper sectors of the solar system. Mitchell stated calmly. The projection zoomed rapidly into the orbital void, focusing on a massive, perfectly engineered metallic ring spinning silently in deep space. A long-range transport vehicle glided into its center hub. Instantly, the core of the ring ignited with an intense, blinding flash of white light, bending the stars behind it before the ship vanished entirely from the telemetry screen. Mitchell let the image linger, casting long shadows across Paula and the stunned recruitment unit. These are merely a fraction of the active infrastructure projects currently hidden from public networks. And your unit is the mechanism that will choose exactly when and how humanity is ready to see them.
Okay, I genuinely need to, take a collective breath here, because the sheer density of what we just read is...
It's staggering.
It really is. We are looking at a complete masterclass in how you deconstruct a civilization using its own legal framework against it.
I mean, the brilliance of this text is that it completely abandons the tropes of a traditional dystopia. There are no supervillains in capes.
Right.
There is no malevolent AI deciding humanity is a virus. It operates entirely on cold mathematical optimization. It basically takes macroeconomic policies that are actively being debated right now in our real world and pushes them to their absolute logical extremes.
Yeah, let's start breaking down the mechanics of Paula's timeline, specifically that initial era she calls the structural squeeze, which runs roughly from 2024 to 2040. The author points to two highly specific, almost mundane bureaucratic events as the inciting incidents of this new world.
The zoning ruling and the fiscal package.
Exactly. First, a 2024 United States High Court ruling on public space zoning. Second, a 2026 fiscal omnibus package that slashes federal resource allocations. Now, just to establish our baseline for you, the listener, as we analyze this, we're looking strictly at the mechanics of this fictional 2050 framework.
Right. We aren't endorsing or condemning real-world policies on zoning or subsidies. We're just impartially tracking how this specific narrative uses those concepts as the foundational building blocks for total societal control.
Exactly. And those building blocks are entirely economic in nature. Paula's research demonstrates how a society handles the massive structural unemployment generated by algorithmic automation. We are talking about the era where AI finally hollows out middle-income administrative jobs.
The accountants, the data analysts, the middle managers.
Right. And the conventional, somewhat utopian assumption is always that when robots do the work, society implements some form of universal basic income.
Sure, yeah.
The machines produce the wealth, the state distributes a baseline stipend, and humans are freed from mundane labor.
Right. But wait, let me stop you right there. Because this is the part that always trips me up when we talk about dystopian economics. Why wouldn't corporations want a universal basic income in this scenario?
What do you mean?
Well, if New Start and all these other conglomerates are using AI to produce millions of widgets or grow millions of tons of food, they fundamentally need someone to buy those things, right? Capitalism requires consumers.
Okay, yes, I see where you're going.
Right, so if the entire middle class is displaced and has zero money, the consumer economy collapses. How does New Start survive if nobody can afford to buy what they are selling?
So that is the exact blind spot the text exploits.
Yeah.
You are analyzing the 2050 world through the lens of a 20th century consumer-based economy.
Okay.
The structural squeeze Paula is documenting represents a deliberate shift away from consumer capitalism altogether. The elite no longer need you to buy next year's smartphone.
They don't.
No. They don't need you to purchase consumer goods to generate corporate profits. They have transitioned to an infrastructure and resource-based economy. When artificial intelligence and advanced robotics reach a certain threshold, the corporation's goal isn't to sell products to the masses. The goal is to build planetary and eventually interplanetary infrastructure for themselves.
Oh, wow. So they don't need my money. They just need the physical resources and the energy that my existence would otherwise consume.
Precisely. In a post-automation world, a massive consumer class isn't a market to be sold to. They are a logistical burden that drains the electrical grid, consumes fresh water, and occupies premium real estate.
As dark.
Very. So instead of implementing a UBI to keep the consumer wheel turning, the governments, who are likely heavily lobbied by these exact conglomerates, do the complete opposite. They introduce a universal baseline contraction. They actively shrink the safety net at the exact moment it is most required.
And they pair that economic starvation with strict spatial enforcement. The 2024 zoning ruling. This is the mechanism that absolutely terrifies me. They didn't just make it difficult to be poor. They engineered a legal trap where it becomes an actionable offense to simply exist in physical space if you don't possess private financial backing.
Right. So let's look at how municipal budgets actually function to understand how this trap snaps shut. When AI automation hollows out administrative jobs, commercial real estate crashes. Office buildings just sit empty.
Right, because nobody is going to the office.
Exactly. And when commercial real estate crashes, municipal property tax revenues just absolutely plummet. Cities suddenly find themselves utterly broke. They can't afford public housing. They can't afford infrastructure maintenance.
And they certainly can't afford to manage massive populations of newly displaced, unemployed citizens occupying public parks and sidewalks.
So the state fundamentally outlaws existing outside of capitalism. Think about how insidious this is. It is an aggressive, weaponized game of musical chairs.
I love that analogy. Let's explore that.
Okay, imagine you are playing this game. The music is playing, everyone is circling. The music represents the traditional labor market. Suddenly, AI automation kicks in, the music stops, and half the chairs are just gone.
Gone in an instant.
But instead of the rules saying, oh, well, you're out of the game, go sit on the floor, the municipal government passes a law stating that standing on the floor is now a felony. The floor itself is criminalized.
That is an incredibly accurate way to visualize it. It's the weaponization of legislation to ensure the state doesn't have to carry the financial burden of the displaced. You are squeezed between two immovable legal walls.
Right.
The private market has no use for your labor because an algorithm can do it cheaper, meaning you can't buy a chair. Simultaneously, the state has criminalized the floor, meaning you cannot legally exist outside the market.
So, mechanically, what happens to the person standing on the floor? The police come, they enforce the zoning ordinance, and then what?
Right, and that transitions us directly into the 2030s and 2040s. The text labels labor resource realignment. Notice the terrifying sterility of that language, by the way.
Oh, absolutely.
Paula's research refers to unallocated human populations. It completely strips away all humanity. It basically treats living, breathing people like surplus warehouse inventory that just hasn't been assigned to a supply chain yet.
It's pure logistics terminology applied to human suffering.
And this is where the correctional labor integration system is introduced. The text explicitly points out that while AI took all the administrative jobs, critical industrial sectors like agriculture and supply chain logistics face severe labor deficits due to border attrition policies.
Right, they basically still needed cheap physical hands to pick crops, sort recycling, load transit capsules.
Exactly. Jobs that are either too delicate for heavy robotics or simply cheaper to do with human labor, especially if that labor is essentially free.
Enter the 2040 Eurozone transition facilities. They're pitched to the public as temporary resource hubs, almost like massive community support centers. But Paula digs into the legal architecture and finds they're classified as contracted institutional facilities.
And here is the automated trigger mechanism. If an individual remains outside the formal employment registry for more than 90 days, a completely automated registry tracking system flags them.
Nobody even looks at it.
No human social worker reviews the file, no judge signs a warrant. An algorithm simply generates a housing transition notice. You are routed to a facility, and under existing legal exemptions for penal loop labor, you are integrated into automated agricultural grids.
Okay, we need to pause on penal loop labor because that is the loophole that makes this entire dystopian engine run. I am assuming this is heavily referencing real-world constitutional exceptions like the 13th Amendment in the U.S.
Right.
Which abolish slavery except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted.
The author is absolutely extrapolating from that exact legal framework, but on a global scale. Think about it. If existing in unmanaged public space is a municipal crime, and you are caught doing it because you lost your job in your apartment, you are technically a violator of the civic code.
Right.
The state doesn't want to pay to put you in a traditional prison. That costs money they don't have. So they outsource your housing and your rehabilitation to a private agricultural facility.
Ah, I see.
The legal exemption allows the corporation to extract physical labor from you in exchange for your room and board.
It is modern-day indentured servitude, laundered through the veneer of a civic resource program. But my question is, how do you manage a transition this massive without society just instantly collapsing into violent revolution?
That's the million-dollar question.
I mean, how do you convince millions of formerly middle-class workers like data entry clerks, marketing managers, loan officers to suddenly go pick synthetic tomatoes in a penal loop facility?
Well, you don't convince them. You exhaust them. The text uses a very specific phrase: precise, incremental optimization. If a government held a press conference tomorrow and announced we are sending all unemployed citizens to corporate labor camps, the population would burn the capital to the ground.
Obviously.
But that's not how the boiling frog works.
It's the slow squeeze.
Exactly. The government says, due to severe budgetary constraints, we must optimize our public spaces for public health. Then, slowly, over a decade, they make it impossible to sleep on a park bench. They make it illegal to park a car overnight in a commercial zone.
They require a registered digital address to access basic water rations.
Yes. They systematically remove every single alternative to participation. The population becomes psychologically and physically exhausted simply trying to survive the friction of everyday life.
They just wear you down until the trap looks like a rescue.
Exactly. When you are at your absolute breaking point, starving and terrified of being arrested for sleeping on the sidewalk, the automated system pings your device and says, "We have a guaranteed housing and food allocation ready for you at a regional resource hub."
Wow.
It isn't framed as subjugation. It is framed as salvation from the very crisis the system engineered.
Salvation via subjugation. You get a cot, you get a nutrient packet, but you are now legally and biologically bound to a corporate supply chain, which brings us to the end game, the year 2050, where the trap is fully snapped shut. Let's look at the entity holding all the keys.
By 2050, the concept of a traditional labor market is completely dead. The framework is governed by something called the Civil Stability Accord. Under this system, residential access undergoes a fundamental, horrifying mutation.
Okay, tell me more about that.
We are accustomed to viewing housing as a consumer commodity. You sign a lease, you pay your rent, the apartment is yours for the duration of that contract. In this 2050 equilibrium, residential access is redefined as a regulatory benefit tied directly to algorithmic productivity quotas.
I want you, the listener, to truly visualize the mechanics of this. Imagine you are living in a municipal apartment in 2050. It's a Tuesday. You wake up, you take the transit line to the transition facility. Maybe you were sorting agricultural yields or recycling component.
Right.
Your required metric for the day is 1,000 units. But maybe you're exhausted. Maybe the machine on your line jams for 20 minutes. Maybe you just have a bad day. You hit 950 units. Under the Civil Stability Accord, your facility access credentials automatically expire.
And they expire by that very evening.
By evening, yes. You take the transit line back, you walk up to the door of your apartment, the place where all your belongings are, the place where you slept the night before, and the smart lock simply flashes red.
Just nope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't get an eviction notice. You don't get a 30-day grace period to appeal to a housing court. The algorithm calculates that you did not justify your existence that day, and your door simply does not open. And the text notes that by the very next morning, Automated Logistics Transit routes you to a regional processing sector to fulfill unfilled labor quotas somewhere else.
You are just shifted to another part of the planetary machine, like a spare part being moved from one warehouse to another.
It's chilling.
The crucial mechanism you are highlighting is the total elimination of judicial friction. I mean, in our current society, removing a human being from their shelter requires a massive amount of friction.
Right.
You need courts, lawyers, sheriffs, written notices, and time. That process is slow, and that slowness, while frustrating for landlords, acts as a fundamental protection for human dignity.
It gives you a chance.
Exactly. The 2050 system has digitized and automated that friction entirely out of existence. Your housing is contingent on your daily output, monitored and enforced by smart contracts.
And all of this leads us to the overarching entity orchestrating this nightmare. When Paula gets recruited out of her tiny Berlin apartment, she realizes who is actually pulling the strings. It's her old contact, Mitchell. And Mitchell is a walking embodiment of this world's inequality.
Mitchell is 130 years old, but according to Paula's observation, he appears to be in his late 30s. The text mentions radical biogerontological therapies. In the late 2030s, these treatments were restricted to sovereign leaders, but by 2050, they have been completely optimized and monopolized by the corporate elite.
It's the ultimate privatization, isn't it? They haven't just privatized the public parks and the housing infrastructure. They have privatized time itself.
Literally.
They have literally privatized the human lifespan. If you are part of the unallocated mass, your life is measured in 24-hour productivity metrics and 90-day unemployment triggers. You are living minute to minute. If you are Mitchell, your life is measured in centuries.
Which forces us to examine the sheer scale of the entity Mitchell represents, the New Start Corporation. When Paula is on that sealed maglev train tearing through southern France, she reviews the corporate blueprint. If we look at the financial architecture of New Start, it redefines the concept of a monopoly.
Okay, so I actually have an analogy for New Start's business model because I had to map this out just to wrap my head around the sheer audacity of it.
Let's hear it.
We used the musical chairs analogy earlier, but let's look at the corporate side. New Start operates like a casino that has weaponized local legislation to ensure total systemic entrapment.
Okay, I follow.
Imagine a casino that cleans you out at the blackjack tables. That represents the algorithmic automation centers. New Start built the AI that took your administrative job and bankrupted you. But instead of throwing you out on the street, this casino lobbied the city council to make it a felony to leave the casino property.
So you are trapped on the premises with zero capital.
Right. And then the casino graciously offers you a deal. You can go wash dishes in the basement kitchens to pay for a tiny cot in the boiler room. That represents the transition and integration facilities.
I see.
New Start owns the AI that displaced you, and they own the labor camp that houses you, and the cherry on top. They also own the digital bank that issues your meal tickets, the smart locks on your cot, and the private security force acting as the police. It is perfectly closed loop. You can never leave the casino.
It is the ultimate vertical integration.
They hold monopolistic charters on both ends of the macroeconomic crisis. New Start caused the displacement, and they profit from the management of the displaced.
Yeah.
This raises a fundamental geopolitical question, actually. In this 2050 timeline, has New Start effectively become a sovereign nation-state?
Oh, that's interesting.
Are traditional governments even relevant anymore, or are they just administrative rubber stamps for these massive conglomerates?
Well, the text implies that traditional nation-states have essentially outsourced their sovereignty. The text explicitly states Mitchell is effectively managing his own sovereign country, operating entirely outside the boundaries of traditional nation-states.
Right, because the governments were backed into a corner by the cascading failure of municipal budgets. They needed a solution to the millions of unallocated people occupying public space, but they absolutely refused to raise taxes on the wealthy to implement UBI.
So they just handed over the keys.
New Start walked in and offered a turnkey solution. Grant us the legal charters, grant us the penal loop exemptions, and we will manage the population for you at zero cost to the state. The governments willingly traded their authority for equilibrium.
Which brings Paula to Spain. And this is where the narrative pulls the rug out from under the listener, and honestly from under Paula herself. Because up until this point, Paula, and by extension you, the listener, assume that the Earth of 2050 is a ruined, exhausted husk.
Right. Given the brutal labor camps, the rationing, and the extreme spatial enforcement, the natural assumption is that these are desperate measures in a world ravaged by climate collapse and industrial decay.
Exactly.
We expect the Iberian headquarters to reflect that reality like a grim, brutalist, concrete fortress surrounded by toxic smog.
Right. You expect Blade Runner. But she gets out of the subterranean terminal, and she is standing in a structural marvel. Biomimetic architecture. A building covered in a photoreactive skin with solar rays woven naturally into the design. The air is clean. It is a stunning, hyper-advanced utopia.
But immediately upon entering this utopia, Paula experiences a massive cognitive dissonance. It's one of the most subtly disturbing details in the entire text.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
In this hyper-advanced corporate headquarters at the very epicenter of the AI revolution, there are no autonomous robots doing the manual labor.
Yes. We've just spent half the deep dive analyzing how robots took all the jobs, forcing everyone into penal loop agriculture. But here, in Mitchell's fortress, humans are manually tending to the lawn care. Human hosts are directing foot traffic.
It's so weird.
The deliberate absence of robotics is striking. And I actually have a strong theory about this. To me, this is an incredibly dark psychological flex by the elite.
A flex in what sense? Break down the psychology of that.
Think about the nature of status. If every middle manager in 2028 could eventually afford a robot to mow their lawn, then having a perfectly mowed lawn is no longer a status symbol. Technology democratizes luxury.
Okay, I follow that.
So, true luxury, true status in a post-automation world isn't having access to technology. It's having access to human servitude. Mitchell doesn't need humans to tend his lawns. He uses them because he wants to see them serving him.
Right.
It validates his elevated, godlike status. It's the elite saying, I am so powerful that I can afford to use a biological human being to do a task a machine could do instantly, simply because I prefer the aesthetic of their submission.
I see why you'd look at it as a flex of vanity, but if we look at the logistics of Mitchell's operation, it's actually much more insidious than that. It's not vanity, it is a systemic requirement.
Really? How so?
Mitchell explicitly states later that what the system extracts from these workers is not physical labor, but human connection, which is computationally required for social stability.
Explain that, because when I read it, it sounded like corporate doublespeak. What does he actually mean?
He means it is a pressure valve for the entire society. If the unallocated masses are locked in transition facilities with absolutely zero interaction with human aspiration, the despair curve causes a total collapse in their productivity.
Oh, wow.
People simply stop working and die. By allowing a select few to work in these pristine utopian environments, even if they are just cutting the grass, it creates an illusion of mobility. It creates a psychological anchor.
So they see it and think there's a chance.
Exactly. The masses see humans working in the headquarters and think, the system still requires us. It prevents total psychological collapse. The lawnmowers aren't just servants. They are structural load-bearing pillars of the illusion.
That is horrifying. They are literally farming hope to keep the engine running.
And it aligns perfectly with the philosophy Mitchell lays out in the amphitheater briefing. Don Summers introduces the new public communication unit, and then Mitchell walks in, looking 30 years old, and drops a massive holographic bomb on the room.
He reveals the great secret of the 2050 timeline. For 25 years, there has been a secret macro-environmental cleanup operating in the background. They have been systematically extracting particulate matter from the atmosphere.
Yeah.
They have been desalinating and purifying the oceans. They have completely contained and neutralized the legacy radioactive material from the early nuclear boom. The Earth is healing. The clean energy matrices are generating massive baseload power. They have effectively solved the climate crisis.
But the data is completely absent from any public record. Paula and these top-tier global analysts are sitting there frozen in absolute shock. How is an ecological rehabilitation of this scale mathematically possible without the public knowing?
And Mitchell's answer is perhaps the most cynical justification for dystopian control I've ever heard.
Right, he blames information management. Sovereign governments and conglomerates utilized absolute, weaponized information containment to prevent what he calls social destabilization.
Let's translate that corporate speak. What does social destabilization actually mean in this context?
It means revolution. Mitchell explains that the elite needed the friction of the previous decades. He says that friction allowed for the consolidation of unprecedented private capital and the optimization of automated algorithmic labor. If you break that down economically, he is stating that if the displaced masses, the billions of people losing their homes and jobs to automation, knew that the Earth was healing, that clean energy was abundant, that there was actually enough for everyone to live comfortably, they would have demanded their share.
They would have demanded the utopian outcome. They would have said, the robots are making the limitless energy, the robots are growing the food, the air is clean, so we should all get a universal basic income and enjoy the park.
Precisely. The elite realized that true utopia, a post-scarcity world of abundance for all, would mean the end of their absolute control and the end of their ability to accumulate limitless private capital.
Right, you cannot maintain a monopolistic hierarchy in a world of infinite abundance.
Ukraine.
They couldn't allow a post-scarcity mindset to take hold in the general population, so they artificially maintained the illusion of severe scarcity. They kept the public networks flooded with narratives of environmental crises, resource limits, and economic exhaustion.
They literally forced the global population to believe the ship was sinking so that everyone would willingly chain themselves to the oars and row in the galleys, not realizing the captains were already sailing in pristine, calm waters.
Wow, yes.
They used the terror of a dying world to trick humanity into building the infrastructure of a new one, but securely lock them out of the benefits.
Yeah.
It's a breathtaking manipulation of reality.
And that leads us to the final permanent economic structure of this new world. Mitchell lays out the rules of the game for the 2050 reality. He tells the analysts that every individual is guaranteed baseline residential access, clean water, nutrition, and medical optimization.
Right.
On paper, if you strip away all the context, that sounds like a massive victory for humanity. Nobody is starving. Nobody is dying of preventable diseases.
But it is explicitly conditioned upon absolute adherence to standardized civic rules. And more importantly, Mitchell reveals the core economic engine of the trap. There is no private accumulation of capital for the general population.
Right.
The baseline resource allocations, the digital vouchers Paula researched, expire precisely at the end of each 30-day cycle.
Let's really slow down and analyze the economic theory of expiring fiat currency, or what we might call programmable central bank digital currencies today.
Let's do it.
In our current world, currency functions as a store of value. If you earn $100 today and you only spend $50 on survival, you put the other $50 in a bank.
Okay.
Over years, those 50s accumulate. That accumulation is wealth.
Right, it gives you options.
Exactly. Wealth is essentially captured time and effort that you can deploy later.
Wow.
It is the engine of social mobility. You can buy a house, you can start a business, you can leave something for your children.
In the 2050 framework, they have severed currency from the concept of time. The vouchers are not money. As Mitchell explicitly says, they are a mechanical reflection of the operational loop.
Right.
You are given exactly enough credits on day 1 to survive until day 30. And at 11:59 p.m. on day 30, if you have any credits left over, your balance is wiped clean. It resets to 0.
It is a mathematical elimination of social mobility. You are locked in a permanent biological holding pattern. You can never save enough to buy your way out of the transition facility. You can never save enough to start a competing enterprise. You are perpetually anchored to the present tense.
It is survival as a service. Think about software as a service today. You don't actually own the program. You just pay a monthly subscription to access it, and the moment you stop paying, you lose access to all your
Yeah,
work.
that's exactly it.
In 2050, you don't own your life, your labor, or your future. You just license your existence 30 days at a time from New Start Corporation.
From a logistical standpoint, it creates a perfectly closed, perfectly predictable system. The corporation knows exactly what the global demand for food, water, and shelter will be every single month, because nobody has the capacity to consume more than their allocation, and nobody has the capacity to hoard resources.
Right. The velocity of the vouchers is 100%.
But of course, there is an exception to this rule.
There is always an exception for the elite.
Always. Mitchell explains that individuals possessing advanced technical competencies, the AI developers, the bioengineers, the structural robotics experts, they operate outside the expiring voucher baseline. They retain the regulatory option to accumulate permanent wealth.
So society has fundamentally speciated.
Yeah.
You have the 99% who are trapped in this 30-day expiring loop, forced into agricultural grids, acting as a psychological pressure valve. And then you have the 1%, the technical and corporate class, who still get to participate in the flow of history, who still get to accumulate capital and build legacies. And what are they building with all that concentrated capital and captive global labor? That is the final, jaw-dropping reveal of Mitchell's presentation.
Mitchell expands the holographic array, pushing the images upward until the ceiling of the amphitheater opens into deep space. He reveals what the elite have actually been doing while the rest of humanity was forced into penal loop agriculture for 3 decades.
They aren't just cleaning up the Earth, they are leaving it, or at least they were expanding past it. The hologram shows massive orbital manufacturing platforms, sealed transport logistics moving along precise corridors in orbit, a sprawling pressurized colony spanning the lunar surface.
And then the projection zooms into the orbital void and focuses on a massive, perfectly engineered metallic ring spinning silently in deep space. A long-range transport vehicle glides into the hub, the core ignites with a blinding flash and physically bends the light of the stars behind it as the ship vanishes entirely from telemetry.
A warp gate, a hyperspace relay. Whatever the specific technology is, the implication is staggering. Humanity, or rather the microscopic fraction of humanity allowed to participate, is becoming an interstellar species. They have conquered the stars.
If we look at this through the lens of the Kardashev scale,
Yeah.
the theoretical measurement of a civilization's technological advancement based on the amount of energy they can harness, this is the leap toward a Type 2 civilization.
Wow, yeah.
But the text makes a devastating sociological point. Achieving that level of cosmic expansion requires unimaginable amounts of energy, resources, and coordinated labor. The elite couldn't build orbital rings and lunar colonies while also supporting a thriving, high-consumption global middle class.
The math just didn't work.
The math didn't work, so they sacrificed the middle class. The entire interior landmass of Earth and billions of people were converted into a captive labor engine specifically to fuel the elite's ascension to the stars.
I want you, the listener, to really put yourself in Paula's shoes in that amphitheater. You are a historian. You've spent your entire life documenting the misery of the structural squeeze. You've mapped the municipal zoning laws, the gradual criminalization of poverty, the loss of human agency.
Right?
You truly believed it was a story of systemic collapse, a tragedy of a world falling apart, and then Mitchell shows you this space ring, bending the stars, and essentially says, no, Paula, it wasn't falling apart. It was all going exactly according to plan.
It is the ultimate paradigm shift. And then Mitchell delivers the final directive, which is perhaps the cruelest part of the entire narrative. He looks at this newly assembled communication unit and says, your unit is the mechanism that will choose exactly when and how humanity is ready to see them. He hands Paula the ultimate public relations nightmare.
Seriously, imagine getting that assignment on your first day of work.
Hey, Paula, welcome to the New Start team. Your first job is to draft a press release to the billions of people living in 30-day indentured servitude loops. You need to tell them that we secretly cured the environment, hoarded all the clean energy, and built an interstellar stargate using the wealth and labor we squeezed out of them. Also, none of them will ever get to use it. Please use non-triggering language.
It highlights the role of media and communication in this established equilibrium. In 2050, Paula isn't a journalist. She is an architect of perception. Her job isn't to inform the public, it's to manage their psychological reaction to a reality they have absolutely no power to change.
Exactly.
How do you even begin to sell that reality without triggering the very social destabilization Mitchell spent 30 years avoiding?
You'd have to sell it as a religious awakening. You'd have to frame the space colonies not as a luxury escape for the billionaire class, but as the glorious shared destiny of the entire human race, even if 99% of the human race will never leave their regional transition facility.
Right.
You have to make the serf feel an overwhelming sense of pride in the construction of the castle, even if they are legally barred from ever stepping inside. You have to weaponize awe.
Which brings us back to the psychological anchor, the human connection. The elite need the masses not just to work the agricultural fields, but to witness their greatness. What good is bending the stars and conquering the galaxy if you don't have an audience back on Earth looking up at the night sky in conditioned reverence?
Well, okay. As we start to pull out of this deep dive and synthesize the absolute mountain of information we've just unpacked, the core theme of this source material is profoundly unsettling. It is exploring the terrifyingly thin line between absolute systemic optimization and total human subjugation.
It serves as a stark reminder that efficiency is not inherently a moral good. When you optimize a complex societal system solely for productivity and resource management, and you successfully remove the friction of human rights, judicial due process, and economic mobility, you do not create a utopia. You create a perfectly calibrated machine where human beings are reduced to replaceable cogs, maintained only as long as they are computationally useful.
And it forces us to look critically at our own current trajectories. Right now, in our world today, we are grappling with these exact same seeds. We are seeing massive, unprecedented strides in AI and automation that threaten administrative labor.
Right.
We are seeing intense municipal debates about public space zoning and how we legally handle unhoused populations. We are seeing private equity firms buying up single-family homes, pushing the middle class toward a permanent renter economy. Paula's journey in 2050 New Age is a work of fiction, but the legal and economic building blocks of her world are sitting right in front of us.
That is the most valuable takeaway from analyzing this text. The timeline is fictional, but the structural mechanisms, algorithmic bias dictating access to resources, the privatization of public infrastructure, the transition toward a subscription-based existence where permanent ownership is a luxury reserved solely for the elite, these are very real concepts accelerating right now.
Absolutely.
The text merely removes the brakes and follows them to their logical conclusion. It challenges us to ask where the friction in our own systems, the slow courts, the zoning debates, the labor unions, is actually protecting us, and what happens when we let corporations optimize that protective friction away.
Which leaves us with a final thought, something for you to deeply mull over as you go back to your day. Perhaps swiping your own smart locks, checking your digital subscriptions, or reading headlines about the latest AI breakthroughs. We open this deep dive by talking about how we expect dystopias to be loud and dramatic, but this one is built on a quiet, airtight, bureaucratic guarantee.
So quiet.
So I want to ask you this directly. If a corporation like New Start came to you tomorrow and they offered you a guaranteed baseline existence, perfect health optimization, clean oceans, pristine air, absolutely zero risk of starvation, exposure, or disease, the world is saved. But the absolute non-negotiable condition of this deal was that you could never build wealth. You could never own your home. And your entire existence was reduced to a 30-day corporate lease, governed entirely by a daily productivity algorithm. Your life is perfectly safe, but it is no longer yours.
Wow.
Would you take the deal? Or is the chaotic, polluted, uncertain freedom of our current world worth fighting for?
That is a lot to think about.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this intense deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning the structures around you, and never let them optimize away your humanity. We'll catch you on the next one.
Dreaming with Eyes Open, Storydoy.